Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Art 195, 3D modeling for animation for the fall semester 2021. Today, what I want to cover is lighting. So when you're working on your toy project, and especially your final project, that not only do you focus on the modeling of your objects, you focus on the surfacing, but lighting, I think you'll discover, is also extremely important and can really make or break a scene. I don't know how many of you have ever seen a dark ride at Disneyland with the lights turned on. They're not terribly interesting. They're really kind of a disappointment, to be quite honest. What really makes those dark rides work is the lighting. And that's something I think that you'll discover the more you use LightWave, Blender, any other 3D modeling program, that what can really bring your models and your scenes to life will be the lighting. So let's go ahead and talk about lights today. Lights as they pertain to LightWave, that is, at least. There's lots of different kinds of lights. The default lights that come with LightWave, when you open up a brand new scene, are a distant light and an environment light. So if we look down at the bottom, and I'm in layout right now because that's the only place that you can see or add lights. You can't do that in Modeler. We come down here and I make sure that I have lights selected, and you can see I have a light and I have an environmental light. So when you're working with lights, very often what you're going to do is you're going to have, with the lights selected, that you're going to click on properties so that you can see the property panel and you can see what color the light is, the intensity, and various other things depending on the kind of light that it is. And you can also edit the kind of light as well. If at any time you want to add lights, you can go to items, and down at the bottom here, or in the middle, I should say, where it says add lights. So what I want to do is, we won't cover all of these today, but we will cover a good number of them, okay? You can see anywhere from an ambient light to a spotlight down at the bottom. Let's go ahead and start with ambient light, okay? But if I start with ambient light, and it used to be covered here with any of the lights that you had, that if I add an ambient light here, we can look at its properties. And you can see that it changed just by adding that one light in the middle of our environment. It really changed it considerably. Ambient light, just to let you know, it's a good light to start with, is that if you're in any environment, there is, even if you were to turn off all the lights and close all the windows and the doors and everything, that eventually some light would penetrate, that your eyes would get acclimated and adjusted to that some light would come in. Well, that's what ambient light is. And to have light intensity 25% is kind of ludicrous. At the most, ambient light should never be probably more than 5%. And that's it. If at all, maybe you can drop it down to 2 or 3%, but it should never be any more than that. If your scene seems to be underlit, and you want to crank up ambient light, it's sort of a quick fix, but not a desirable one. So that's ambient light. We'll start. That's a good one to start with. The next that we'll go to after ambient light will be, let's just look at the light that they have provided for us, the distant light and its behaviors. So by default, the color of the light is white. We also should probably look at the scene editor as well. So if we go to the background, and so let me look at the backdrop here. that this is going to look really different because the backdrop by default, which includes the environment light, has a gradient. So if I double click on that, come on, there we go. We open it up. We can see that the zenith color is blue. That's what's affecting our background, or the color of our objects rather. And the ground color is white and the sky color is white. So it more than anything kind of represents something that you would see out of doors, you know, an out of door kind of light. If I turn off the backdrop here and we switch to just a black background, look at how different my scene appears. That what I had to do to compensate for that, to make sure that the lights or the objects were visible, is that I made them kind of a middle gray color. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to switch to, let's see, not light properties. I want to go to my surface editor, and I'll show you what the objects look like when I turn on, come on, let's go back, surface editor. Come on. There we go. So I just have one default color here for all the objects. This, for those of you maybe who have had a class, a drawing class, and you've done kind of a typical starting kind of still life with geometric objects, this is what it looks like now with the background turned off. But watch what happens when I turn the backdrop back on. It just bleaches everything out. So it's something that you have to compensate. Now, because this is very taxing on my computer to do all of this, it's really going to slow everything down. So I hope that you guys can be patient with me today while I cover this. Also, in addition to that, let me go ahead and turn off the backdrop so we can see this. So it looks like a typical still life that you would see in your drawing class. Another thing that's unique to lights is that sometimes you're going to want to point a light at a very specific object, or you want to know exactly where your light is pointing. I mean, we can tell from the direction of the shadows that it's in the upper left-hand corner over here. But if you want to see exactly what the light is pointing at, instead of looking at our scene through the current camera, we can also look at it through the light view. And you can look at it from the current light, which is the one which is our distant light. You can look at it from the environment light or from the ambient light. I want to look at it from the current light, which is our distant light. And you can see that it's pointing towards the middle of our scene. Okay. Now it takes time. The only way that we can really see our scene properly is that I have to view it in VPR mode. And that's what's taking a lot of time to redraw on my computer. So I'm just pointing these out to let you know that if you want to adjust your light and have it point to a particular object in your scene, then you can always look at it from the current light perspective. I'm going to go back from that to our camera view. And now I want to talk about other particular properties that distant lights have. Think of a distant light like the sun, is that it's just a big wall of light. So if we were to move the sun or our light, X, Y, or Z coordinates, it really would not affect the lighting in any particular way. To show you that, I'm going to go ahead and go from VPR to textured standard here, shaded view. And you can see the graphic representation of the light here. Okay. Now, if I use the move tool, T for move, and the way that we can tell whether the light is having an effect on this or not is that watch, if I move the light from one side of the stage to the other, the light doesn't change. You can see that the highlights, we can't see the shadows, but nothing really changes. If I move it back, and if our light is behind all of the objects, it still doesn't have an effect. So if I go back and I turn VPR back on, it hasn't changed. The only way that you can, if you want to change how the distant light is affecting your scene, is to rotate it. So instead, if I hit Y for rotation, and if let's go ahead and let's spin it along, because when we have rotation, we have heading, pitch, or bank. Bank won't do anything, but heading will affect it considerably. Now watch what happens. Right now it's set to 41, a little over 41 degrees. What if I were to change that to 90 degrees? Okay. Notice how the shadows are all directly to the right now. They're not, before they were almost at a 45-degree angle behind the scene. So that's the principal way of changing the light if you're using a distant light. The other thing that you should take note of let me go ahead and turn the background off there. Let's turn that off. Let's just look at light properties. The other thing that you should note with different kinds of lights are the kinds of shadows that they cast. And you can see that with the distant light, the shadows are fairly harsh and they are crisp. You could always change the color of the shadow if you wish. It's not often that we do that, but you can do that. If you want a softer edge for your shadow, a softer light, what you need to do down here is we need to change the volumetric distance. Okay, so if I want, I can change here from 1 meter, and I'm going to change this to 10 meters, see what happens here. Okay, and see if we get any real difference here. And if that doesn't do much, we can also affect the angle of it. So notice that similar to what we had with the moving the light, the distance of the light doesn't have an effect either. So I'm going to go back to 1 meter because that doesn't have an effect. But the angle of the light has a big difference. Right now, the default setting is 0.52 degrees. But if I go ahead and I crank this up a bit, let's crank this up to maybe 10 degrees. Angle of the light. Now you can see that the edges of the shadows, once this finally re-renders, is much softer. So it really depends on the kind of look that you're going for. If we are rendering an outdoor scene and you want the light source to have a very intense effect on the objects, then maybe you don't want the shadows to be soft. You want them to be really hard edged and have a more, visceral, visible kind of a effect that way. So that would be one thing that you could do. So those are distant lights. The next one that we can use, and also you'll notice too that with the light intensity, by default is 3.14 lux. Don't ask me what a lux is. That was changed a couple of versions ago. It's used all the time. I know for those of you who are photography majors, has a specific meaning or measurement of light. Okay, so that's the default intensity of the light. So, and that will be the true for all of the others. But you'll also notice too, there is no fall off for a distant light. The sun is the sun. It is what it is. But as soon as we switch from a distant light to a different light, So let's go from that to, let's switch to an, we had distant. I'm going to go to a point light. We've used one of those before. And you're going to see that it really is going to get much darker. Because what a point light represents, and you can see that it's behind the object. That's why everything is in shadow now. So it's quite, different than a distant light. So I need to go maybe from our top view, and I need to move it, in front of our light, in front of our objects. So let's go ahead, and I'm going to change this back from VPR to texture shaded solid. Okay. And you can see where our light is, it's behind it. So I'm going to hit T for move, and I'm going to bring it forward, and it will have a distinct effect. And if I move it as well, watch how the highlight up here affects it. Now this hot spot down here is from the environment light. All right, so let me look at this also from the top view. See, make sure that it is in front of our lights or in front of our scene here. Let's go back here. Come back, and it is. It's directly in front. I want it a little bit over to the left here. Okay. Now let's go back to our camera view. Okie doke. It really, it takes a lot to illuminate a scene with a point light. Also, what you'll notice though, is that with this, starting with the point light, but not with a distant light, we have a fall off, which means you can have an intensity of a light, but it doesn't, the farther you are away from the light, the less impact or the less effect it has on the objects. So if I were to turn that off, so and an example of that, I'm not explaining it terribly well, but it would be if we were on a football field, you were at one end, I was at the other, and I was holding a candle. You would be able to see the candle in my hand, but it would not affect you in any way. It doesn't have, think of it as like candle power. It doesn't have that much effect. That's what the fall off does. So if I were to turn the fall off, now you can see how bright 3.14 lux has on the object. So it really depends on, how you want to light your scene, whether you're going to have fall off and it's going to be closer to a realistic kind of, if you're going to use the point light as we did in our first table and lamp, so that it actually resembles a real light bulb in a scene, then you would probably want the fall off to exist. If you're going to use the light for another purpose, then it would not, maybe you don't need the fall off. Now, when I go back to VPR, okay, you can see that my highlights in the upper left-hand corner and the shadows too are very similar to what we had with a distant light. And again, if I turn off or turn fall off back on, the only way I can get this to work is, let's go ahead and make this 24 lux. And that will really, but even at 24 lux, it's a very soft light. Okay, so as you can see though, from just working with two light sources now and changing the intensity of them, the distance, the angle for the distant light, to control the softness of the shadows, it can have a profound effect on the outcome and the general overall appearance of your scene. Okay. So that's a point light. And again, the default color is white. If we wanted to bathe our scene in another color, let's say we wanted it to have kind of an overall kind of reddish glow to it, we could do that, or, tint. This also is a very effective way of lighting the scene too, is to bathe it in in an overall color to tie all the objects together. Okay, visually. I'm going to go back to white. So that, yeah, the color of your light can also have a huge, huge effect. So that's a point light. Now, in addition to point lights, we also have, what I want to do is I'm going to use a spherical light. A spherical light is similar to a point light. It's just a ball of light. The difference is it's somewhere between a point light and the sun. That the size of the light can have a huge, huge effect on the quality of the light and the shadows. Again, I'm going to go ahead and I have that set to 24, but I'm going to set it back to the 3.14 lux of the original. That makes it really, really dim. But you can see the size of it is only 100 millimeters. Let's go ahead and change the size of that to 2 meters and just see what it does. Okay. Not a whole lot. Okay, so let's try that again. Let's change the size again, and I'm going to make it 10 meters. Now I'm just kind of guesstimating here. Whoa, now that really blew it all out. So somewhere between 2 and 10, let's make it 4 meters and see what we get. Yeah, that's not changing it a whole lot. So let's go to 6. This is with my gallery. This is pretty much what I had to deal with. I had to, notice in the upper left-hand corner, that's the size of the light that's affecting everything. So I'm going to go back to 1 meter so that we don't see it. I'd have to pull it farther away. And again, I'm going to turn off and fall off. Let's see what we have here. So by turning off fall off, by increasing the size of our spherical light from, what was it, 10 millimeters to 1 meter, you can see that it's affecting the shadows. And again, the shadows become a really important component to your scene to make it really look realistic. Because shadows very rarely are really crisp all the way around. They're generally, shadows are stronger the closer to the object they are. The edges are more crisp or crisper, and then the farther away from the object the shadow is, the lighter it becomes and the softer the edge. So this is probably a little bit more realistic view of how this would look, how well it would look. So that's a spherical light. Spherical lights are really, good lights to use in many, many situations. So let's look at a couple of other lights. We've got spherical light that was way down here. Let's look at a linear light. A linear light is an array of 4 point lights. So that's 4 point lights in a row. It would be similar to having what is it? Oh shoot, I can't think. It's a fluorescent light that you would have in your home or garage or something like that, or what we have in the computer labs. So let's switch to linear light and see how that affects it. Again, a single linear light, 3.14 lux, is probably closer to a point light. It has softer shadows. It's a little bit more dim. So I could either crank up the intensity of the light if I wanted a different effect. I can always add additional lights. I'm just using one light for right now to give you an overall appearance of what's going on. The length of it, again, the size, we can change those. The size is 20 millimeters. Let's change the size of it to 1 meter and see how that affects it. Okay, it's a little bit brighter. If we change the length, the distance, let's change that to 5 meters. Okay, so there's all of these variables that need to be taken into consideration. Now, remember, I have intensity fall off, but if I turn the fall off back on, it's going to be really dim. And you can see in the upper left-hand corner, this little white hot spot here, that is a representation of the light that you don't want to see in your scene. So I probably want to change the size of it back to maybe 100 millimeters. Okay. And then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to turn the fall off back off so I can see what my scene looks like. So it's a darkly lit scene. And again, you know, in most instances, when you have fluorescent lights, you're going to have, you know, multiples of those, quite a few of them. Okay, to really illuminate an area, an interior of a room, typically. Okay, so that would be, yeah, a linear light. Now, similar to a linear light is an area light. An area light is an array of 4 linear lights. So that would be equivalent to 16 point lights. And probably what I should also show you, and let's go ahead and do that before I switch from linear, is that if I go back from VPR to shaded solid, and let's switch to perspective view as well, because I want you to be able to see the representation of what the lights look like. And you can see it has kind of the appearance of a fluorescent light. If I were to go back to the spherical light, again, it's just a big ball. And it starts off, remember I said it's very small. It was 100 millimeters, but once I made it 1 meter, it changes size. It's just a big ball of light. Okay. So that was the linear light was the one that I wanted to show you. So let's go back here. Let's go back to light type, spherical. Let's go back to linear so you can see what that looks like again. Okay, just this bar of light. Now, if I switch from a linear light to an area light, look at what it looks like. It's this plane of light. Again, remember, think of this as 16 point lights. So let's switch back from perspective and go back to our camera view. Okay. So that's, you know, considerably brighter. Intensity, you know, fall off is turned off. If I turn that back on, again, it's really going to be pretty dimly lit. But again, you can always crank it up. I'm going to try 24 lux and see how that looks. Let's try 50 lux. Yeah, it takes a lot for it to really illuminate the area. So also the size of your environment will have an effect on how much light you need. So pay attention to the scale that you're working at. Changing this back to 3.14 lux. And I'm also going to turn off. And I'm going to switch back to VPR. So you can see again the shadows. And the shadows of an area light, which generally give you probably in an interior, one of the most ideal kinds of shadows. They're nice and soft and really create an ambience, you know, that you can't get any other way. Okay. So area lights are used an awful lot and you know, and it would be good for your, what I want to show you on Wednesday, for example, will be to create an ideal kind of setup that you would use for a product shot. And area lights and spotlights and fill lights. There are about half a dozen lights that we would want to use to properly illuminate your, you know, illuminate your object, your toy, whatever it is that you want to show, whatever product you have. So that's the area light. And then we can have down here, let's try another one. Let's try a spotlight. Okay. Now, a spotlight is a cone of light, and you can see that it's not focused on the objects itself. Spotlights, you know, think of them in a movie theater, in a setting for plays and that sort of thing. That, you know, it's a cone, think of it as a cone of light, because that's what it is. And this would be a good opportunity to look at this through the light view and see exactly what it's pointing at. And you can see that it's pointing away from everything. So what I can do now is I can hit Y for rotate, and we can move it back. Let me, yeah. With VPR turned on, it really makes it very difficult. Yeah, and you can see that there's this, and that's the end of the cone. And if I go ahead and I move it like so, now it's facing my scene. That helps me an awful lot. It takes a lot less computing power to do that. And we can also determine how soft or how sharp the edge is. You'll notice on yours, if you do this inner ring, at this point, it's really sharp, and then it gets really soft from this point. And if we look over here, you can see that with the spotlight that we can change the size of it. We can also change the soft edge. By default, it's set to 5.5 degrees. We can also change the cone angle. The default is 30, but I can change it and make it much narrower, like so, if I so choose. So there, let's make it 20, just for the heck of it. And now let's go back from our light view to the camera view and see how it's lighting our scene. And again, we can change the soft angle. You know, do you want it really crisp, or do you want it a soft edge? Now let's look at it from VPR. And for, you know, if you're interested in creating, you know, drama, really dramatic scenes, then a spotlight is the way to go. The only downside is that you can see that the shadows cast from the spotlight are really crisp. So in addition to that, you would for effect, you would want maybe a spherical light in addition to that, or in addition to your spotlight, so that you can get varied shadows as well as a dramatic effect for your scene, the scene itself. Now, there's one thing that you can do with spotlights that you can't do with any other light. And that is that you can project items from it. So for example, if I wanted to, you know, think of it like a projector, that you can project images. You can also create the illusion, for example, of window frames. You know, that you have light shining through a window. And so we can try that. So let me give that a whirl. Let's go ahead and, without having to build the whole environment, so it looks like lights shining through a window. So what I can do, let's try here. I'm going to come down here and project an image. I'm going to come down here and let's look for images. We have window panes, mask, invert. Let me try that and see what that looks like. There we go. That's what I wanted to show you. So this is, this creates the illusion that light is shining through, maybe it's moonlight, maybe it's light from a lamp light that's coming from outside of a window. And there is no, room, there is no environment, there is no window. It's just the image that we used for the scene that I created last week, showing you advanced, surfacing techniques. Same thing. So now what I could do is I could change the color of my light. So maybe it's this bluish light that we have. It would be, from moonlight. And before you know it, you can create a pretty dramatic scene. And this is the sort of thing that I want you to experiment with your toy, because I want you to work with very simple objects. And I want you to create more elaborate surfaces, that add detail to it without having to add a lot of geometry to your model. And then set up your scene and optimize the lighting for it to really create, a unique, interesting environment for it. Okay. So this is just this one spotlight. Well, we do have the environment light. We do have that we created. We also have, what was the other one that I created? We have your ambient light. But really, they're not having a huge effect on our scene. But just, by creating some very simple geometric objects, but really working with lighting, you can create a really interesting scene. Right? So it's that sort of thing that I'm, want you to experiment with this next assignment. Now, in addition to those, there's some other lights that we have here. And also, instead of just that black and white image, if I were to, that was what I wanted to show you. Let's go back again. I'm going to load a different image, and I'm going to pull this from one of the images that we've used for the reboot character. So if I come back here and let's use an image of the river, okay? Or maybe that sandbar image that we put behind Reboot Mike. So this will work very similar in a similar fashion to just projecting an image onto an object that can have a very powerful effect. Come on. There we go. So you can sort of see, let me change the light back to white. Hopefully you can see projected. There we go. So now you can see that scene projected on all of those objects. Again, it creates complexity where there really isn't much. You can see here's the scene, there's the sand in the foreground, and up here is that river or whatever, and then the backdrop. It's being projected onto our scene here. So that's another thing that it can do. You can create illusions of windows, or what I did with a window is called kind of a cookie, kind of short for cuckolora, which is a way of, it's used in movies all the time. creating the illusion that there are outdoor leaves or trees and things like that at night, when in fact there are none. And so I chose to use a window for that. It's used for that as well. So you don't have to build an entire environment to create the illusion of one. And the only light that you can do that with is the spotlight. You can also add lens flares. I can turn that on and see if that shows up at all. You generally have to see the light when you do that. I'm not seeing the lens flare now because the light is not in our scene. Okay. That would be another thing. And those can enhance a scene as well. Give it kind of the details that you want. You'll also notice that with some of these lights, here's the basic effects that this light can have. You can also go to shadows, and you can change the color of the shadows if you wish. The other thing that you can do with lights that you can't do in the real world is that you can exclude some lights or some objects. So for example, if I didn't want this light affecting the cone, and I don't know which layer the cone is on, but let's go ahead and just exclude one of these and see which one it is. It happens to be the cube. That got turned off. If I go back again, let's turn that off again. Now watch, the cube comes back, and let's turn the first one off. Let's see what the first one was. That must have been maybe the floor. Let's go ahead and take the next one. Okay. Oops. Come on. Yeah, it's really bogging my computer down. There we go. That's the cone. So you can see that you can exclude lights. And I did that the other day with, no, I didn't, but you can. I was going to say I did that with the fill light that I used for the side of my cube. So that's another thing that we can do. So there are all of these different settings that you have, basic, and depending on the light that you choose will determine how many basic settings there are. For each of them, you generally can choose the color of the shadow. And you can, with all of the lights too, you can choose which objects you want to illuminate. They all illuminate or illuminated by default. But if there's some, that, especially for fill lights, that you don't want to have an effect, then you can always turn those objects off. Okay. So that's our spotlight. The other one that I wanted to point out, so we've got sunlight. Let's try some of these. I'm going to switch. This bright kind of yellow. Now, for sunlight, that sort of works. We work with a spot, we work with a spherical, not with a primitive, we do it with a point. Photometric. So some of them that we aren't working with today. I'll show you what a photometric does. N-gons are, you can turn polygons or N-gons into light sources. I want to show you the photometric, show you what it does. To do that, what I need to do is show you the scene that I did my, hold on here. That my gallery that I did for that. So hold on here. I'm going to pull this down. I'm going to add. Here we go. And let's go to, there we go. So if you look at this scene that I've set up here, my gallery, to the left is what the scene looks like rendered. To the right is what it looks like in wireframe. And you can see that the lights that I have here inside the can, that illuminates the artwork on the walls, looks a bit different than the style that we've had before. There are what are called IES lights, or the photometric lights, that you can download, and you can find them online. And what they do is they simulate real lights in the real world. And so that's what I chose here. There are different kinds of spotlights that I chose that would normally be used to illuminate artwork in a gallery. I also used not area lights, but I used a broader kind of light source for the can lights in the middle of my gallery to illuminate the room even more. I had in all three rooms, I think, a total of over 100 lights. Now, in one of my scenes here, show you an example of, let's see. It's not there. Where is it? Here we go. If we look in the upper left-hand or upper right-hand corner here, you can see that I added a little bit of a lens flare. And with all of these lights too, I added a little bit of volumetric lighting, but that required that I put a separate set of lights in here so that you get that little foggy haze that you see around lights sometimes, especially with a dark background. So that took, all in all, that took a bit of work to do all of that. It also took a bit of work or time, I should say, to render some of these scenes, to render them at 200% and with, I forget how many, some of the other settings that I use. I'd have to go back and refresh my memory. But some of these took up to 15 on my laptop. That's what I'm using here to render this. Took upwards to, 15, sometimes a little bit more, a little bit less hours to render. So be prepared. The more lights you use, the more taxing it will be on your computer. And it will, especially when it's time to render, it will really take a lot more rendering time, the more lights that you add. You typically only need at least maybe, well, one light, but very often you're going to have at least 3 lights to render a scene. You're going to have your main light, you're going to have a fill light, and you're going to have a backlight. So right now, with the scene that I created for this demonstration, I only have a single light source. But what I do want to do is show you on Wednesday something called a light stage, that it's a bowl that you'll have access to inside classic content. And then the lights are already set up. And we'll have like 2 main lights, and you'll have fill lights, and you'll have backlights, so that you can put your object in there. It's really set up for ideal lighting that you would use for a product shot. So let me go back here to the default distant light. Yeah, for a product shot, and to really showcase the object that you've created. It really does a good job without having to do a whole lot of work. And I would like you guys to see it and experiment with it yourself And for your toy assignment, if you want to use the light stage and the default settings that they have set up, I encourage you to do so, okay, to be able to experiment with it. So that's pretty much all the time that I have today for my demonstration. It really is, as I said, the more I use this and the more lights that I switch around and use, it's really taxing on my computer. So be prepared when you start to play with lights. I also, it's kind of an encouragement and a warning too, when you're working on your final assignment and you really want to properly light it, that be prepared for to experiment with a variety of light setups to see which one works best for you. And maybe there's a couple of different approaches that you can take when you're done. And then the last thing is that, as I said, that since the more lights you use, it will affect the amount of time that it takes to render, that you're going to have to allow for that additional time that it will take to render your final project. To do the table and light, to do the table and lamp, I should say, and to do our reboot character, we only used one light. So it doesn't, and it's not a big deal. But when we start to add more lights, you'll see that it does really slow down the render time. You can see that my computer right now, I got that little spinning beach ball, that things are probably not working properly. So unless there are any questions from you, that's it for lighting today. We'll continue with lighting on Wednesday. And as I said, I will show you how to use and where to find the light stage and the light setup that they have used for that to get you started with a more complex lighting system than what we've experimented so far. But lighting can really make or break a scene, no question about it. You can have done a wonderful job modeling, a wonderful job surfacing, but if the lighting doesn't work, your whole scene can fall apart. Okay, so if there aren't any questions, that's it for today. I'll take this recording and put it up on YouTube so that you can check it out later. And I encourage you to experiment with most of the lights that I've talked about today. And by all means, go and do a Google search for IES lights. And you should find a place. I'll try to bring that up on Wednesday so you can download all different kinds of lights that are used in interiors and exteriors to create exactly how they look in the real world. They're the way they work is the physics of them is exactly the same as what you would see in the real world. So those kinds of lights, in addition to area lights and spotlights and stuff, can really enhance your scene tremendously if you wish. But anyway, that's what I chose to use to try to create a realistic lighting experience in my gallery. Okay. Okie doke. I'm going to sign off and we'll go ahead and end the recording, and I'll see you guys on Wednesday. Okay. Bye-bye.